Welcome to Blind Trust. In the summer of 2026, for the first time ever, the World Cup comes to North America, the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Billions of people will tune in, and the entire tournament is run by an organization that, on paper, is little more than a non-profit registered in Switzerland. Almost no one watching will stop to think about how that organization really works, or about what happened the last time the US government took a hard look at it, because a decade ago, it sat at the center of one of the strangest corruption cases American prosecutors have ever brought. Strange because almost none of it happened in America. In May of 2015, plainclothes police walked into Zurich's most exclusive hotel and let out the men who ran world soccer, some of them hiding their faces behind hotel bedsheets. The charge was bribery, more than $150 million of it, stretching back 24 years. But the officials weren't American. The sport wasn't American. None of it happened on American soil. So why was the United States the country arresting them? Before we get to how America pulled that off, you have to understand what these men actually controlled, because on paper it looks like almost nothing. FIFA, the body that governs world soccer, is legally a non-profit. A small association registered in Switzerland, whose stated purpose is to organize a tournament every 4 years. That tournament is the World Cup, and it is one of the most valuable events on the planet. A single World Cup brings in billions of dollars, paid by television networks for the right to broadcast it, and by global brands for the right to stand beside it. And underneath it sits a whole pyramid of smaller tournaments, regional championships, youth competitions, qualifiers, each with its own television and marketing rights to sell. Every one of those rights is worth a fortune, and the decision over who gets to buy them rested with a small circle of officials. Men who answered to no shareholders, no regulator, and no government. They ran a multi-billion-dollar business with the oversight of a local sports club, put a fortune in front of a handful of people, take away anyone with the power to check them, and you don't need to be cynical to guess what tends to happen next. The only real question is how long it can run before someone outside that circle finally looks. And it had been running for a very long time. To see how deep it went, you have to go back, well before the arrests, to the man who turned soccer into a business in the first place. His name was João Havelange. A Brazilian, he ran FIFA for 24 years, from 1974 to 1998. Before him, FIFA was a sleepy committee with almost no money. Havelange turned it into a commercial machine, courting sponsors, selling television rights around the world, and expanding the World Cup into the global spectacle it is today. He did it hand in hand with a marketing company called ISL, which controlled FIFA's rights for decades. And when ISL finally collapsed in 2001, its books spilled open in a Swiss courtroom. Investigators found that the company had been quietly paying bribes to the very officials who handed it those rights. Havelange and his former son-in-law alone had taken more than 40 million Swiss francs. Sit with that for a moment. The bribery wasn't a rumor and it wasn't new. It was documented. In writing more than a decade before the Americans ever showed up, and almost nothing happened. Havelange kept his honorary title until 2013. No one went to prison, so the culture didn't change. It simply learned that it could survive being caught. By the time the FBI started asking questions, this was no longer a story about a few corrupt men. It was a system, a decades-old way of doing business, hiding behind a non-profit, and utterly confident that no one could touch it. Breaking it would take someone on the inside. And in 2011, the inside cracked. The crack had a name, Chuck Blazer. For 20 years, Blazer ran the sport across North America as the General Secretary of CONCACAF, the body that governs soccer from Canada down through the Caribbean. He was an American, which is going to matter more than it sounds right now. And he lived the way the deals paid. A multi-million-dollar apartment high up in Trump Tower in Manhattan, dinners with heads of state, travel by private jet, and famously, a second apartment down the hall from the first, rented just for his cats. Officially, none of it added up. Blazer's soccer salary was a small fraction of what he spent. The money was coming from somewhere it was not supposed to, a cut he quietly skimmed from the deals he helped sign, and for years, no one with any power seemed to notice or to care. Then, in 2011, two American agencies set out to find where the money came from. And here is the strange part. They weren't from the world of soccer at all. One was the FBI. The other was the tax authority, the IRS. The IRS is not who you expect to bring down world soccer, but that is exactly the point. Blazer had been taking his cut for years, and he had never paid taxes on a dollar of it. And tax evasion is a crime the United States can prosecute no matter where in the world the money was earned. It was a single thread. When investigators pulled it, the whole thing started to come apart. Facing the very real prospect of prison, Blazer made a choice. He became an informant. He walked into meetings of the most powerful people in the sport carrying a recording device hidden inside a keychain. For roughly 2 years, soccer's inner circle talked business, deals, rights, payments, and the FBI was listening to every word. They heard officials weigh the price of a vote. They heard bribes discussed as casually as the catering. What they heard turned a tax case into the largest corruption case in the history of the sport. But prosecutors still had a problem. The problem from the very first minute of this story. The bribes were paid in other countries, by foreigners to foreigners, for rights to tournaments played far from the United States. To charge any of it in an American court, they needed something that tied all of it back to America. And on the face of it, they didn't have it. To see what those recordings exposed, look at one scheme up close, because it shows you how the whole machine worked. South American soccer sells the rights to its tournaments, most famously the Copa America, the continent's oldest championship, to sports marketing companies who resell them to broadcasters and sponsors at a profit. It is a quietly enormous business. The company pays the soccer body a fixed sum, resells the rights for more, and keeps the difference. The bigger the tournament, the bigger that gap, and the more it is worth paying to be the company that gets chosen. 3 of those companies, including a Brazilian group called Traffic, run by a man named Jose Hawilla, joined forces into a single consortium called DATISA. DATISA won the rights to the next several editions of the Copa America, and according to United States prosecutors, it did not win them on price. It won them with bribes, roughly $110 million, promised to the officials who controlled the deal. And one of those editions had a special name, the Copa America Centenario, a 100-year anniversary tournament. And for the first time ever, it was staged not in South America, but in the United States in the summer of 2016. Stadiums in New Jersey, in California, in Texas. A tournament whose rights prosecutors said had been bought with bribes was about to be played across American soil. But the Copa America was only the polite version of the corruption, because the bribes weren't just about who got to televise a tournament. Sometimes they were about something far bigger, who got to host the World Cup itself, and no one embodied that better than a man from Trinidad named Jack Warner. For 30 years, Jack Warner was one of the most powerful men in world soccer, a FIFA vice president and the king of the sport across North and Central America, and the Caribbean. Warner controlled something priceless. Blocks of votes, because hosting a World Cup is worth billions to a country, and the decision of who hosts it comes down to a vote of FIFA officials. Officials like Warner, US prosecutors laid out one example in detail. In the bid to host the 2010 World Cup, they said $10 million moved toward Warner and his allies, and South Africa got the tournament. So this was never only about television rights. It reached the crown jewel of the sport itself, the question of which nation on which continent got to host the world's biggest event. That is what was quietly for sale. The clearest and strangest example came in December 2010. In a single afternoon inside a room in Zurich, 22 FIFA officials cast votes to decide the next 2 World Cups at once, handing 2018 to Russia and 2022 to Qatar. The second of those names landed like a shock.
Certainly the most surprising decision was the 2022 victory by Qatar to become both the first Middle East nation and the smallest nation to host.
It should tell you something that, in the years that followed, 11 of the 22 men in that room would be fined, suspended, banned from the sport for life, or criminally charged. Qatar's selection stunned the sport, a tiny desert nation with no real soccer history in summer temperatures well above 40 degrees Celsius. So hostile to the game that the entire tournament had to be shifted, for the first time ever, out of summer and into November and December. And years later, in a 2020 indictment, US prosecutors would allege it plainly that bribes had been paid to secure votes for both the Russian and the Qatari bids. To its credit, FIFA had tried to investigate itself. It hired an American attorney named Michael Garcia, who spent 2 years examining the 2018 and 2022 bids and delivered a report hundreds of pages long. But when FIFA released only a short summary, one that cleared nearly everyone, Garcia publicly called it incomplete and misleading, and resigned in protest. The full report would stay locked away until 2017, when FIFA finally published it. And when the indictment came, Warner did not go quietly. Back home in Trinidad, where he remained a powerful political figure, he went on television and dismissed the whole thing. At one point, even waving around a satirical article as if it were real proof of a conspiracy against him. He fought extradition to the United States for years. Warner was the loudest, but he was not the strangest twist in the case, because the man the Americans arrested as the sitting president of his region, the one who had run for office promising to clean the sport up, turned out to be the one wearing the diamonds. We will come back to that reformer in a moment. But first, the question this whole story has been circling. How did the United States get to charge any of this? Here is the problem prosecutors faced. In plain terms, a bribe paid by an Argentine marketing company to a Paraguayan official for the rights to a South American tournament is not, on its face, America's business. So follow the money. Take Alejandro Bursaco, one of the executives who actually paid these bribes. When you move money like that, you don't carry cash in a suitcase. You wire it. And here is the part almost nobody thinks about. When you send dollars from anywhere to anywhere, that payment almost always passes, for a fraction of a second, through a bank in the United States. That is simply how the dollar works. The world's banks settle their dollar transfers through accounts in New York. Picture it as a single bridge that nearly every dollar on Earth has to cross. A bribe wired from Buenos Aires to a private bank in Switzerland still touched American soil on the way across that bridge. And under United States law, that one touch is enough. The wire fraud and money laundering statutes don't ask where the bribe was agreed. They ask whether the dollars moved through the American financial system. They did almost every time. That was the key that unlocked the entire case. The men in Zurich weren't really arrested for corrupting soccer. They were arrested for moving their money the only way money that size ever moves, in dollars, across a bridge that runs straight through New York. Once prosecutors understood that, they didn't need the crimes to happen in America. They only needed the money to pass through it. At dawn on the 27th of May 2015, that legal theory became real. Swiss police, acting on a request from prosecutors in Brooklyn, entered the Bor Al Lac, the five-star hotel on the edge of Lake Zurich, where FIFA's leadership had gathered for their annual Congress. 7 officials were arrested in their rooms. Among them was Jeffrey Webb, the president of CONCACAF, Blazers' old region, a man who had taken office promising reform, and who was later found to have spent the proceeds on luxury watches, property, and a custom-made diamond-encrusted pendant. The indictment, unsealed that same morning in New York, named 14 defendants and ran 47 counts: racketeering, wire fraud, money laundering. The person who announced it was the Attorney General of the United States, Loretta Lynch, standing in Brooklyn. She did not mince words.
They were expected to uphold the rules that keep soccer honest and to protect the integrity of the game. Instead, they corrupted the business of worldwide soccer to serve their interests and to enrich themselves.
And so the question that opened this story finally had its answer, said out loud by the top law enforcement official in the country. But the names in that indictment were only half of it, because to move all those millions across the bridge, you don't only need corrupt officials, you need banks willing to carry it, and to look the other way while they do. This is the part of the FIFA story that most tellings quietly skip. The bribes didn't launder themselves. Behind the officials were bankers who moved the money and asked no questions. At a Swiss private bank called Julius Baer, a relationship manager named Jorge Arzuaga handled tens of millions of dollars in soccer bribes for his clients, moving the money in layers through shell companies and accounts in names that meant nothing, and was later paid a bonus for the trouble. He pleaded guilty in a Brooklyn courtroom. And the bank itself eventually admitted that it had helped launder more than $36 million in bribes through the United States, agreeing to pay around $80 million to settle. A second bank, this one in Israel, admitted its own role and paid more than $30 million. These were not rogue tellers. They were private bankers whose entire job was to know exactly where their clients' money came from, and who chose, again and again, not to ask. For the first time, the people being prosecuted for soccer's corruption weren't only soccer officials. They were the quiet financial machinery that had carried the money across the bridge. And that machinery turned out to be the case's greatest weakness, because the people who run it would far rather give up their clients than give up their own freedom. That is the quiet engine of a case like this, and it is worth understanding because it is how nearly all of these cases actually get won. Prosecutors rarely topple a system from the top. They start at the edges, with the people most exposed, and they offer a trade, cooperate, name the others, wear a wire if we ask, and your sentence shrinks, refuse, and you face the full weight of it. One by one, the people inside the scheme did the math. Jose Hawilla, the Brazilian marketing boss at the center of the Copa America deal, agreed to forfeit more than $150 million and to cooperate. Alejandro Berzacco, the executive who had paid so many of the bribes, surrendered, pleaded guilty, and became one of the prosecution's most valuable witnesses, testifying in open court about exactly who took what. Each cooperator handed prosecutors the next set of names. The case didn't so much explode as expand, outward steadily, from the people who paid the bribes to the people who took them, and onward to the men who had sat at the very top of the sport for decades, including the one man who, until that summer, had seemed completely untouchable. At the center of it all sat Sepp Blatter, the president of FIFA for 17 years. Blatter was never charged in the American case, but the timing was brutal. The arrests came just 2 days before FIFA's presidential election, and Blatter won anyway, securing a 5th term. Re-elected, he was defiant, dismissing the idea that outside governments had any business inside FIFA.
So listen, if the governments will try to intervene in FIFA's organization, then something is wrong. I think the FIFA is strong enough that we can deal with our problems inside the FIFA.
Then, 6 days after the arrests, only 4 days after that victory, he stood in front of the cameras and announced he would step down. By the end of the year, FIFA's own ethics committee banned him from the sport for 8 years, and the Americans were not finished. That December, prosecutors filed a second larger indictment, 16 more officials, and a total that now climbed past $200 million in bribes. In the end, more than 50 people and companies were charged. 2 officials were convicted at trial in Brooklyn. Many more pleaded guilty. A handful are still fighting extradition to this day. FIFA promised reform. A new president, Gianni Infantino, was elected in 2016 on exactly that promise. Whether the system truly changed or simply learned again to be more careful is a question people still argue about. But one thing was no longer in doubt. The case had done what the sport's own watchdogs had failed to do for decades, and it had done it from a courthouse in Brooklyn. In a country where, for most people, soccer is an afterthought. And that is where the FIFA case stops being about soccer at all. Remember the bridge, the fact that almost every dollar on earth passes through New York. That isn't a quirk of the soccer case. It is a permanent feature of the global financial system, and it means American prosecutors can reach almost any deal. In any country that uses dollars, soccer was not the first time, and it was nowhere near the last. Just 1 year before the FIFA arrests, the French bank BNP Paribas pleaded guilty in New York and paid nearly $9 billion for moving dollars on behalf of countries the United States had placed under sanctions. The bank wasn't American, the clients weren't American, but the dollars crossed the bridge, and that was enough. For a year afterward, BNP was even barred from clearing certain dollar transactions at all, which, for a global bank, is close to a death sentence, and it kept going. Other global banks, names like HSBC and Standard Chartered, would face their own American penalties, measured in the billions, for the same fundamental reason: their dollars touch the United States. This is a quiet kind of power, and Washington has used it again and again against banks, companies, and entire industries far from its borders. Most of the world only notices when the indictment lands, but the leverage was always there, humming under every transaction, waiting. In my view, that is the real story of FIFAgate. Not that soccer was corrupt. Most people already suspected that. It is that the quiet machinery of the dollar turned a foreign scandal into an American case, almost as a matter of plumbing. The men who ran the world's game just happened to be the ones who found out. So where does that leave the sport and the rest of us? FIFA got its new president and its promises of reform. The dollar kept doing what it has always done, and the men who once ran the tournament learned, the hard way, whose financial system the world's money actually moves through. In 2026, the World Cup returns to the United States, Canada, and Mexico for the first time in 32 years. A tournament whose last great scandal was untangled, dollar by dollar, in an American court. The bridge is still there. Almost every large deal in the world still crosses it. So the only real question the FIFA case leaves open isn't about soccer at all. It is simply this: who finds out next?